Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when the pyramids were new, sandals were peak fashion, and your afterwork drink wasn't a cold lager, but a warm, frothy, slightly chunky mug of fermented date beer. Yep, we're going to ancient Egypt, a place where the desert sun beat down relentlessly. But along the Nile, life bloomed green and sweet, especially in the shade of a date palm. You're there now, drifting under a rustling canopy of fronds, your feet cushioned by soft, cracked earth and stray bits of dropped fruit. The air is heavy with that unmistakable smell of ripening dates, rich, syrupy, almost like burnt sugar with a hint of old boots. It's peaceful mostly, except for the bees, and the odd crocodile sulking in the canal. You probably won't survive this without a few bug bites or a solid sunburn, but don't worry, you've got beer to look forward to. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love reading that part. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your stroll on the east bank of the Nile, where the green ribbon of fertile land cuts a winding path through the endless sandscape. Here, between the water and the dunes, the date palms tower like slender giants. They're everywhere. Tall, serene, a little smug. The dates themselves hang in heavy golden clusters, plump and sticky, and absolutely perfect for, among other things, brewing. Historians still argue whether the date palm was truly domesticated first in Mesopotamia or Egypt. Either way, by 3000 BCE, Egyptians had been cultivating dates for centuries. Not just eating them, mind you, though they were certainly popular as snacks, sweets, and even dental glue for wobbly molars, but fermenting them, and not with any kind of modern equipment. No, this was rustic science at its best. The beer they made wasn't filtered, carbonated, or chilled. It was closer to liquid bread soup, served warm, often chunky, and sometimes a bit sour. The Nile's cycles dictated everything. When it flooded, it fed the date palms. When it receded, it left behind rich soil that made those palms flourish. Egyptians were nothing if not patient and observant. They noticed that left to their own devices, date juices would start to bubble and change. Add a little barley or emmer wheat mash, and poof, accidental chemistry became cultural ritual. There's even some archaeological evidence that date beer, or a close cousin, predates pyramid building. Excavations near Hierakonpolis, one of Egypt's earliest cities, turned up ceramic vats with residues of fermented date paste dating to around 3600 BCE. That's old. Like, older than most math old. You walk past a small village brewhouse now, set back from the river, half shaded by a reed roof. A clay oven smolders low in one corner, and the tangy smell of fermenting mash wafts through the air. Warm, bready, with a distinct sweetness that almost makes your eyes water. Inside, workers are busy, barefoot, wrapped in pale linen kilts, stirring great vats with wooden paddles that look more like oars. You're not on shift just yet, but you pause at the doorway to watch. One woman, possibly the head brewer, yes, women dominated this domain, is tossing what looks like mashed dates into a bubbling vat with practiced flair. And let's be honest, the whole scene kind of smells like a health food store dumpster on a hot day, but in a charming way. Date beer wasn't just a drink, it was a staple. Think of it as their daily multivitamin, hydrating, mildly intoxicating, calorie-dense, and full of nutrients from the grains and fruits. Perfect for workers, priests, pregnant women, even kids. Some brews were weak, made just to avoid Nile water belly. Others, potent enough to knock out a hippo. You'd be amazed how many hangover complaints show up in ancient medical papyri. But don't worry, your first taste will come later when you've earned it. You turn from the brewhouse and continue your walk, passing date orchards arranged in neat rows, each tree carefully tended. These trees aren't wild. They're bred for their sweetness, their soft flesh, their ability to mash down into a pulpy goo ideal for fermenting. Farmers collect the dates by hand, usually from ladders or with long hooked poles, and carry them back in reed baskets. Sometimes kids help out by climbing right up the trunks, which you could try too if you feel like risking a wasp attack to the face. Remember, you're here to relax, not to reenact ancient fruit harvesting mishaps. At the edge of the field, a shallow basin sits half filled with discarded date pits and skins, evidence of a morning's work mashing fruit by hand, foot, or flat stone. Nothing gets wasted. Even the leftover pulp becomes animal feed, or in some cases, added back into weaker brews to stretch them out. You kneel to examine the paste. It's thick, brown, and shiny, like overcooked oatmeal laced with molasses. You dip a finger in brave move and taste. It's surprisingly sweet, until the faint fermented twang kicks in at the back of your throat. That's the yeast talking. Wild yeast floating around in the air, landing gently on exposed surfaces and, when given the right conditions, getting to work. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians knew how fermentation worked or just that it did. Probably a bit of both. After all, they didn't have microscopes, but they knew to leave their vats out in the warmth and cover them lightly, not seal them off. They knew certain pots worked better than others, and some batches went bad if you sneezed on them funny. Superstition? Maybe. Early microbiology? Almost certainly. You rise and brush date paste from your fingers, already feeling a little stickier than when you started. The sun is beginning its lazy descent toward the west, casting golden shadows between the trees. Somewhere upriver, you hear a distant boatman singing, off-key, but cheerfully, as he ferries a load of fresh dates toward the next village. Your day is just beginning. You stretch your arms, crack your neck a little, though hopefully not loud enough to startle the ibis nesting nearby, and head back toward the brew house. Because today, you're not just strolling through someone else's job site. No, today you are the brewer. Linen robe tied clumsily at the waist, check. Sandals, a little uneven, but they'll do. That faint, earthy sour smell of previous batches baked into your hands. Oh, you're definitely part of the team now. The brew house is a squat mud brick structure, cool inside despite the sun glaring outside like an overzealous chaperone. Papyrus mats line the walls. A few wide, shallow vats dominate the central space, bubbling gently with the promise of future cheer. This isn't some industrial-sized brewery. It's a tight, community-focused operation. One batch at a time. And by batch, we mean about enough to hydrate your entire neighborhood for the week. You step inside and are immediately handed a paddle by a woman twice your age and 3 times as commanding. She doesn't speak, just nods toward a large basin of mashed emmer bread and crushed dates soaking in water. Congratulations. It's stirring time. This is your first real task as an Egyptian brewer, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You stir, slowly, gently. The bread pulp swirls with the fruit sludge in a hypnotic dance of carbs and sugars. Occasionally, your paddle hits a lump of half-soaked crust and sends it spinning. The whole mixture is warm, thanks to the sun filtering through the roof slats, and smells, well, not bad exactly, but kind of like a bakery met a compost bin and they had an understanding. It's oddly satisfying, meditative even. You settle into the rhythm, scoop, swirl, reverse, repeat. Historians still argue whether this form of brewing, using crumbled, pre-baked bread as a starter, was a workaround for the grain-heavy processes of later barley beers or just a regional preference. But either way, it worked. And it allowed people like you, amateur alchemists in sandals, to craft drinkable beer without needing metal equipment, timers, or spreadsheets. Someone calls from the other side of the room. You glance over and see a young man tripping slightly as he carries a large clay jar filled with fresh Nile water. It's your next ingredient, and no, it's not filtered. Hope your immune system's in decent shape. He pours the water slowly into the vat and the thick mash shifts in consistency. What was doughy becomes soupy. The smell intensifies, bready, fruity, faintly sharp. Yeast in the air, already activated by the sweetness of the dates, starts to do its invisible work. And just like that, you're brewing beer the way it's been done for millennia. Outside, a scribe passing by might jot down the date. Year 23 of the reign of Amenemhat III, let's say on a piece of ostraca, noting that beer production is on schedule and that today's batch seems promising. Or possibly cursed. Hard to tell yet. You ladle a bit of the mixture into a shallow bowl and place it near the doorway, where the sun warms the surface and encourages early fermentation. This is your test sample, a sneak peek at what's to come. You peer into the bowl like a hopeful baker checking on their sourdough starter. And just as you lean in, a house lizard darts across the floor and startles the soul out of you. Ancient Egyptian brewing wasn't done in isolation. It was social, alive, messy. Chickens wandered in and out. Kids played nearby. Cats kept the mice in check, sort of. It was a place of laughter, gossip, arguments over whose batch turned out best, and occasionally the ceremonial chasing off of bad spirits with incense and mild yelling. You wipe your hands on your robe and move to the drying area, where stacks of half-baked bread loaves, the base for your next batch, cool on reed mats. They're flat, wide, and a bit rough around the edges. These aren't sandwiches waiting to happen. These are fermentation fuel. Dense, cracked loaves made from a mix of emmer wheat and barley, deliberately undercooked so they crumble easily into the mash. You break one open. The center is still soft, the crust barely holding together. It smells. Not unlike bran muffins left in the sun too long. Not delicious but familiar, comforting even. A few flies buzz lazily near the drying mats. You wave them off and return to the vat. The mash is thicker now, more consistent. Another brewer, an older man with exactly one tooth, leans in to taste it with a carved wooden spoon. He slurps, smacks his lips, and nods. High praise. He gestures for you to try. You hesitate, then dip the same spoon in and take a sip. It's warm, mushy, and surprisingly complex, sweet at first, then tangy, then slightly bitter at the back of your tongue. Not bad, not good either, but definitely beer adjacent. The man chuckles at your face and goes back to his bench, where he's mending a cracked jar with resin and twine. Everything gets reused here. Broken pottery, repaired, ash from the ovens, spread on fields. Spoiled beer. Well, even that sometimes ended up in bread again. Historians still debate just how intentional early beer brewing really was. Did brewers understand the process, or were they just really good at mimicking success? Whatever the truth, the results spoke for themselves. Beer flowed through the veins of Egyptian daily life. Rituals, meals, medicine, taxes, you name it, beer was involved. You return to stirring. Outside, the sun has dipped lower, casting a golden light across the packed dirt courtyard. Somewhere down the road, a caravan clatters past, donkeys loaded with jugs, traders shouting half-heartedly, dust rising in lazy spirals. Someone brings in a fresh basket of dates and dumps them on the table next to you. And you're starting to sweat, not from stress, though your paddle arm is getting a workout, but from the low, steady warmth of the brewing room. It wraps around you like a lazy snake, heavy and slow. The rhythmic stir of the mash, the distant hum of bees, the soft clink of pottery. It's a lullaby made of labor. You let yourself drift just a little. Close your eyes for a second longer between blinks. You're not just making beer. You're part of a tradition older than writing. Every swirl of the paddle, every bubble in the mash, ties you to generations of brewers who came before, and to a civilization that built eternity out of mud and sunlight, and maybe a bit of date sludge. The sun is slipping toward the horizon now, and the brewhouse glows in the amber light like a clay oven just shy of baking. Your back is warm from the day's work, your arms faintly aching from hours of stirring, but there's something deeply satisfying about it, a sense of purpose. You're not just passing time, you're coaxing ancient sugars into something sacred, or at least mildly intoxicating. The mash is ready for rest. You and your fellow brewers cover the vat with a fine weave of linen, tucking the corners in to keep out bugs, sand, and nosy goats. It needs time now, several hours or more, for the natural yeast to fully work its sleepy magic. You can almost hear it fizzing beneath the cloth, tiny bubbles lifting ancient secrets toward the surface. You step out into the twilight courtyard, stretching as the sky shifts from gold to mauve. The breeze carries a hint of the river, muddy, green, tinged with fish and lotus. You wander down a dirt path toward the canal, guided by torchlight and the soft slap of reeds in the wind. Nearby, a woman hums a lullaby to her child. Someone else laughs, a soft, snorting giggle, and you smell roasted duck drifting through the air. But the beer isn't done yet. Oh no, we're just getting to the weird part. Fermentation, as any modern brewer will tell you, is a game of patience, temperature, and luck. But ancient Egyptians had a different strategy: religion. If a batch came out right, it wasn't your skill, it was the gods smiling upon you. And if it flopped, well, obviously someone had angered Hathor. Again, Hathor, goddess of music, beauty, love, and beer. A divine multitasker, honestly. Egyptians believed that beer was her sacred gift to mankind, and in her honor they brewed. They also drank. A lot. But first they offered a sip to her altar just in case she was watching, or thirsty. You make your way back to the shrine at the edge of the field. A small stone shelf adorned with carved cow horns, garlands of dried lotus, and a cracked jug half filled with yesterday's brew. You pour a few spoonfuls of your current mash into a cup, whisper a quick thanks, mostly for not burning the batch, and place it beside the others. Historians still argue whether these beer offerings were symbolic or literal sustenance for the gods. Either way, it was best not to skip them. Brewing was sacred business, and the gods, while generous, were notoriously finicky customers. Back at the brewhouse, the night shift takes over. A younger brewer, barely more than a teenager, starts preparing the jars for storage. Each large vessel is coated with a thin layer of beeswax on the inside, designed to keep the brew from leaking or absorbing too much of the pottery's natural flavor. Because let's face it, nobody wants their beer to taste like last week's stew. You help carry the clean jars to the cooling area, a shallow pit lined with damp cloth and shaded from the moon. It's not exactly refrigeration, but it's better than nothing. The trick is to keep the fermentation going without letting the mixture turn too sour. Too warm and it spoils, too cool and it stalls. It's a dance. And tonight the weather is cooperating. Soft breeze, low humidity, plenty of stars overhead. Speaking of stars, have you ever noticed how many Egyptian deities just drink beer? There's even a myth where Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of vengeance, gets tricked into not destroying humanity by drinking herself into a nap. The gods knew their priorities. The young brewer next to you frowns slightly and sniffs one of the jars. He makes a face and mutters something under his breath, probably about gremlins in the grain. You take a whiff too. A little off maybe, too sharp, you both shrug. Brewing's a gamble. This jar might still mellow overnight, or it might become vinegar or paint remover. And that's where the really fun part comes in, flavor control. Modern beer gets hops, carbonation, and temperature-controlled tanks. Ancient Egyptian beer got dates. Lots of dates. Also, sometimes honey, herbs, fig syrup, or even mandrake root. You know, for that extra zing. Sometimes cinnamon or juniper were tossed in, depending on who was making it and how fancy they were feeling. Did it work? Occasionally. Did it taste consistent? Absolutely not. You glance at the table beside the fire, where bundles of herbs and little pouches of powdered resin sit waiting for the morning's flavor experiments. There's a mix of sweet rush, coriander, and dried sycamore fig. A strange bouquet that smells like a candy store and an apothecary had a mildly chaotic baby. You pick up a pinch of coriander and toss it into a small pot of already settling mash. The scent changes instantly, citrusy, slightly peppery, almost modern. like you've just infused your ancient beer with a whisper of summer salad. You take another pinch, this time sweet rush, and sprinkle it into a second batch. The floral notes bloom in the air like perfume. Historians still debate the actual recipes used, since none were written down precisely. But residue analysis from ancient vessels suggests a wide range of additives, which basically means Egyptians were the original craft brewers. You know, minus the plaid shirts and ironic beards. You sit back, jar in hand, and let the firelight dance across your eyelids. The jars are warm to the touch, the mixture inside slowly turning from mash to something richer, deeper, more intoxicating. You hear the distant calls of night herons and the soft gurgle of the canal nearby. It's peaceful now, the day winding down like a slow spiral of steam. You take a cautious sip from a ladle, just to test. It's still a little sweet, still young, but it's definitely on the way. The date flavor dominates, of course, sticky, dark, with a kind of earthy bitterness that lingers. But underneath that is something more elusive. Time, process, transformation. A sleepy kind of magic. And as the stars continue their silent circuit overhead, and the jars sit nestled in the cool earth like ancient secrets waiting to be told, you stretch one last time, brush your hands off on your robe, and whisper goodnight to the batch. If it listens, it might just taste better tomorrow. Morning creeps over the horizon like a lazy cat, pawing at the tops of palm trees and slipping golden claws into the courtyards. You wake to the sound of distant chanting from the temple, someone offering prayers to Thoth for clarity or to Sobek for good fishing luck, depending on the day's agenda. But you've got one mission today: see if your beer survived the night. You shuffle into the brewhouse, sandals scuffing on the packed dirt floor, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The linen cover over the vat is still in place, but the smell tells you something has changed. Gone is the bready porridge scent of yesterday. What you get now is sharper, tangy, a little sour, still warm from fermentation, still alive. You lift the cloth slowly, steam rises lazily. The mash beneath has darkened slightly. The bubbles are fewer now but more deliberate, like they know what they're doing. This is the moment of truth, straining. The teenage brewer from last night is already setting up the system. 2 large clay bowls, one set over the other, and in between, a fine reed mesh, worn and darkened from years of use. You ladle a portion of the thick beer mush into the top bowl. Gravity takes over and the golden brown liquid begins to seep through, slow as molasses but twice as determined. What drips into the lower bowl is your prize, semi-filtered beer, thick by modern standards, but smooth compared to the lumpy mash it came from. It's cloudy, frothy, and filled with potential. You lift the bowl carefully and hold it up to the light. Tiny flecks of date pulp catch the morning sun like glitter, not quite glamorous but oddly charming. Historians still argue whether this beer was meant to be drunk like a liquid or eaten more like a porridge. The truth is, probably both. Depending on the time, place, and wealth of the drinker, you might get a runnier, more sippable version, or a chunky, spoon-fed variety that doubled as a meal. You take your first real gulp. It's weird, sweet and sour at the same time. Fizzy, but only faintly, like a smoothie made by someone who's heard of carbonation but doesn't trust it. There's a grainy texture that sticks to the roof of your mouth, and a whisper of wild yeast funk that tells you, yes, this is alcoholic. Probably. One of the older brewers walks by and claps you on the back hard enough to jostle your drink. He laughs, showing all 4 of his teeth, and says something that probably means, not bad for your first batch. Or maybe that'll loosen your sandals. As the day warms, the rest of the team starts portioning the strained beer into storage jars. Each jar gets a little beeswax around the rim, then a seal of linen and clay. These will be used over the next several days, some for home consumption, some for temple offerings, and some as payment. Yes, beer was currency. A brewer could pay taxes, wages, or even a dowry with jars of good brew. It wasn't just drink. It was social glue. You haul your jar over to the scribe at the edge of the compound. He squints at you, dips his reed brush in ink, and carefully marks the outside of your jar with a few quick strokes. The date, the brew type day temmer, and your name, or at least the best guess at it. There. Officially recorded. You are now part of Egypt's bureaucratic machine. You can't help but feel a little proud. Sure, your beer might be slightly over-fermented and a bit chewy, but it exists. And it tastes vaguely like victory, with notes of old raisins. Nearby, a woman is preparing the next round of brewing bread. She shapes them by hand, dense, thick loaves studded with whole dates, their crusts barely baked. They cool on reed mats and smell like a fruitcake from a particularly damp cupboard. But that's what you need. More sugars, more fermentation fuel. You help her carry the loaves to the prepping area and watch as she crumbles them into water for the next batch. The cycle continues, like the Nile's flood or taxes or that one cat that keeps sneaking into the pantry. It occurs to you how much of this work is repetition. Slow, rhythmic tasks done in sequence, over and over. But there's a certain peace in it, a stillness. You stir, strain, bake, pour, and the days pass like sand through your fingers. You glance at the beer jars lined up against the wall. Some already have names written on them. Others are destined for the temple, where priests will offer them to the gods in elaborate ceremonies that may or may not include interpretive dance. One jar will go to the local overseer as tribute. Another will be swapped with a neighbor for lentils. Beer moves through the village like water, tying everyone together with faint yeast bubbles and a gentle buzz. You take another sip of your brew, now a little cooler. The flavors have mellowed, the texture slightly less aggressive. It's still not winning any awards, but it gets the job done. And if you squint and tilt your head and maybe exhale through your nose while sipping, you almost taste caramel. A bee hovers near the rim of your jar. You wave it away gently, then lean back against the cool wall of the brewhouse. The sun has fully risen now, casting long shadows that stretch like sleepy cats across the courtyard. There's another batch to tend to, another set of loaves to bake, but for now you rest. Your hands are sticky with date syrup. Your hair smells like yeast. You're tired, mildly dehydrated, and your back is not thrilled with all the lifting. But you helped make beer the way it was done 4,000 years ago. And somehow, in the haze of heat, yeast, and endless stirring, you feel connected. To people long gone, to rituals long ended, and to something bigger than yourself. A rhythm that outlasts kingdoms, a drink older than history. You take another sip and smile. The midday sun is an absolute tyrant, beating down with the intensity of someone who took your last date cake and hasn't gotten over it. You duck inside the storage hut where the beer jars rest, safely tucked into their shadowy corners like sleepy hippos in a mud pool. The thick clay walls insulate them from the worst of the heat, and even though it's still warm, you can breathe again. A few other brewers shuffle in after you, grumbling and fanning themselves with reed mats. One of them pulls out a bowl and ladles a generous helping of beer from the latest batch. You do the same because, frankly, you've earned it. The flavor has changed again, still fruity, still yeasty, but with a mellow sourness now that lingers just enough to feel grown-up. You're not just drinking porridge anymore. You're drinking fermented porridge. As you sip, someone begins telling a story, an old one as all the best ones are. It's about a pharaoh who tried to outlaw bad beer. The nerve. Supposedly, he declared that anyone caught brewing a weak batch would have their left sandal confiscated and be forced to drink their own mistakes. Whether that actually happened, historians still argue whether such royal decrees were real laws or just moral tales to scare sloppy brewers straight. Either way, the story gets a big laugh. A few people drift into a nap, stretched out on cool mats beside the jars. You lean your head against the wall and let your thoughts wander. How did people even figure this out? Take bread, add water, leave it to sit until it starts fizzing and hope it doesn't turn into something toxic. That takes a special kind of optimism, or desperation. But the Egyptians weren't just playing fermentation roulette, they knew patterns. Over time, they noticed which combinations of grain and fruit worked best, which temperatures led to livelier bubbles, which herbs helped keep the batch from spoiling. It wasn't chemistry yet, but it was intuition backed by centuries of patient trial and error, probably with a lot of tipsy arguing along the way. Outside, you hear music drifting in from the street. Someone is plucking a lyre, the notes soft and lazy. It's a song about Enit, a local brewing goddess who was said to dip her hair in the Nile to flavor the beer. Bit unsanitary, sure, but undeniably poetic. You hum along more to yourself than anyone, the melody floating through the warm air like a dragonfly. Time passes slowly. The beer rests. You rest. This is the lull before the next batch. Later in the afternoon, you help one of the brewers with a new trick he's trying, soaking dried dates in honeyed water overnight before mashing them. The idea is to jumpstart fermentation with extra sugar. More bubbles, less waiting, he claims. You nod sagely, even though it sounds like wishful thinking wrapped in stickiness. As you mash the new dates, your hands become impossibly sticky. You try to wipe them on your tunic, but just make things worse. One of the temple boys wanders by, sees your struggle, and tosses you a reed scoop filled with crushed lotus petals. You scrub your hands with them, and somehow they work, leaving behind a faint floral scent and less of the date glue. You make a mental note. Add lotus petal scrub to the post-beer routine. By now, the whole compound smells like a dream: yeast, dates, lotus, and just a hint of dust. It's oddly comforting, like someone baked a fruitcake in a sauna. You look around and realize something strange. No one's rushing. Everyone moves slowly, rhythmically, like dancers in an invisible ritual. Brewing beer here isn't a frantic task. It's a flow. Each step connects to the next with the sleepy inevitability of the Nile rising. You stir the mash not because it's urgent, but because it's time. A breeze stirs the papyrus blinds, fluttering the light across the floor like fish scales. You take another sip of beer and lean back, letting the rhythm of the place wash over you. One of the older brewers tells another story, this time about a batch that fermented so powerfully, it exploded from its jar and soaked the entire storeroom. No one dared clean it up for fear of offending Hathor, so the beer stayed there, slowly evaporating until the room became a shrine. Some even claimed the walls started sweating. Divine tears, they said, or just the humidity, others mumbled. But no one moved the jars. It's always like this, isn't it? Somewhere between science and story. You're never just making a drink. You're making a conversation with time, with the gods, with the dozens of brewers who came before you and tried the same things, failed the same ways, and maybe, just maybe, got it right once or twice. You check on your earlier batch, now sealed and gently sweating in the storage pit. You press a hand against the clay, warm but not hot. Good, you tap the lid with your knuckle. Hollow, solid, comforting, this one might be a winner. You place a dried lotus petal on top for luck, a small offering of your own. Not required, strictly speaking, but it feels right. As the sun lowers again and the courtyard glows with that late afternoon warmth, you and your fellow brewers start tidying the workspace. You clean the straining mats, sweep the husks and scraps, stack the used bowls for rinsing. You're tired, sticky, maybe a little buzzed, but satisfied. The day's work is done, the beer is resting, and tomorrow the whole dance begins again. But for now, you sit, bowl in hand, as the first stars blink into view above the palm trees. Someone starts a quiet song, this one about a crocodile who learned to brew in secret and tricked the gods into drinking his terrible beer. A silly tale, but the laughter it brings is real and warm and needed. You take one last sip and whisper to your jar just in case Hathor's still listening. Cheers. By the time the stars really settle in overhead, blanketing the sky like a particularly lazy quilt, made your way back toward the banks of the Nile. You're not alone. Several others from the village are there too, lounging on the smoothed stones or dangling their feet in the slow, syrupy current. The air hums with the quiet chirps of crickets and the faint plop of fish surfacing, each sound folded into the greater hush of nighttime Egypt. You sip from a shared jar of beer, still warm from the day but no less welcome. It's amazing how something that once smelled like wet bread now feels like a small luxury. You look up at the sky. Even that seems slightly fermented. Fuzzy stars like spilled grain soaked in indigo ink. Someone nearby begins to speak, not a story this time, but a list. Ingredients, proportions, brewing notes. The way your grandparent might recite a soup recipe for the 100th time. You listen, half aware, letting the words float past you like reeds in the water. This is how the brewing knowledge is passed on. No parchment, no tablets, just repetition embedded in evenings like this one. You start to recognize some patterns. The ratio of water to emmer, how long to soak dates, when to add honey if you're lucky enough to have it. And then the more fringe techniques. Adding fig sap to hasten fermentation. Storing jars under goat hair blankets to keep them cool. Or the oddly specific recommendation to never brew on a day when the ibis walks counterclockwise. That last one. Even historians still argue whether those sayings were based on observation, superstition, or sheer boredom. A woman sitting beside you gestures toward the jar and asks if you want to learn the old date press method. You nod, always say yes to mysterious invitations involving fruit and ancient techniques. She leads you away from the river and into a small alcove near her home. There, under a half-collapsed awning of reeds, sits a press unlike anything you've seen in the brewhouse. It's essentially a hollowed log propped between two clay bricks, with a lever arm that looks suspiciously like a repurposed plow handle. Inside the log are mashed dates wrapped in linen, tight as a scroll. She positions a heavy stone on the far end of the lever and gestures for you to step on it gently. You do, and slowly, with the kind of satisfying squish you normally only get from squashing grapes or stepping on a jellyfish, date syrup begins to ooze from the linen bundle, dripping into a wide, shallow bowl below. The smell is intoxicating, warm sugar, dust, and the faintest whisper of spice. You dip a finger in the syrup and taste it. Sticky, concentrated, almost fig-like. This syrup is sometimes added late in fermentation, just before sealing the jar. A final gift to the yeast. Or sometimes it's saved and mixed with beer just before drinking, more dessert than brew. Either way, it's liquid gold, and you're now one of the few trusted with making it. The woman winks and tells you that the press belonged to her grandmother who swore by it. Never waste a good date, she said, and never trust a man who brings watery beer. You silently vow to follow both pieces of wisdom. Back at the river, people are beginning to doze. Heads lean against shoulders and the music has faded into quiet humming. You settle onto your mat, now sweet with the scent of syrup on your skin. Before you drift off, someone asks, half sleepily, if you've heard the story about the day Sekhmet almost drank the world dry. It's an old tale, one of the weirdest ones in the Egyptian myth closet. Long ago, so they say, Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war, was furious. As in, ripped the sky off its hinges furious. She was punishing humanity for its arrogance, sending plagues and storms and who knows what else. But then, Ra, in one of his rare moments of mercy, had an idea. He would trick her into calming down with beer. The gods brewed 7,000 jars of it, tinted it red with pomegranate juice to resemble blood, and poured it across the fields. When Sekhmet saw the red flood, she charged in, thinking it was her victims. But instead she drank, and drank, and drank some more, until she passed out cold, woke up hungover, and decided to be a goddess of healing instead. Or at least take the afternoon off. People around you chuckle. The lesson, clearly, is that beer solves at least some problems. Maybe not plagues, but certainly bad moods. You stretch out under the stars, head resting against a sack of date mash that's probably not supposed to be a pillow, but works just fine. Your body feels heavy, pleasantly used. Your fingers smell like yeast. There's grit between your toes and a smear of syrup on your elbow. You are, in short, a brewer. And you're not alone. This process, the squashing, straining, sipping, storing, it's part of something older than pyramids, older than most writing. Long before Egypt was even ancient, people were fermenting whatever they could find, chasing that strange magic where time and sugar meet. A little decay, a little patience, and suddenly, something new. A breeze stirs the reeds again. Somewhere a baby wails, then stops. A frog chirps. And you, lulled by the soft bubble of half-fermented beer beside you, drift into dreams. The Nile mist hangs low the next morning, as if the river is still half asleep and hasn't had its morning beer yet. You rise slowly, spine crackling like dry papyrus as you stretch. Someone has left a fresh bowl of beer on the flat stone beside you, breakfast, evidently. You take a sip, and it's tart and bright, almost citrusy. A nice surprise. You didn't think yesterday's batch would turn out so lively. As you sip, a boy from the temple comes running down the path, barefoot and dust-caked. He's shouting something about an inspection. Your eyes widen, not that kind of inspection, not military, not tax. Worse, priests. Yes, the brewing temple inspectors. Those men in spotless linen who smell like cedar oil and superiority are apparently making the rounds. They don't come often, but when they do, the tension could sour an entire vat. You scramble to rinse off your arms in the river, rubbing date residue off with some sharp grass, and dash toward the brewhouse. Inside, it's a flurry of movement. Mats being shaken out. Jars getting their exteriors scrubbed with wet sand to make them shine. Someone is attempting to mask the smell of an overripe batch by burning frankincense. Creative, if not effective. Your job today. Stand near the cooling jars and smile like the beer made itself. The inspectors arrive in a neat row, sandals perfectly aligned, each carrying a thin reed staff and that practiced look of serene judgment. They make the rounds, dipping ladles, sniffing deeply, muttering to one another. One of them inspects the clay jars you helped seal yesterday. He squints at the surface, taps the lid, then takes a sip from the wooden tasting spoon. You hold your breath. This man once rejected a batch for lacking spiritual harmony. No one even knows what that means. But today he pauses, then gives a tiny nod. That's practically a standing ovation. You're safe, for now. After they leave, everyone exhales in unison, and someone breaks open a jar of celebratory beer. It's still early, but the rules are flexible when the priests aren't around. You drink deeply. This one has hints of tamarind and something peppery. You can't tell if that was intentional, but it works. Now that the morning has calmed down, you return to your regular duties, this time assisting with a lesser-known technique, brewing beer using bread as the base instead of raw mash. It's surprisingly common, especially in leaner seasons. First, you bake dense loaves called bapir, twice cooked, bone dry, and completely inedible unless you're missing several teeth and your sense of taste. You help crumble the loaves into a wide basin and pour water over them. The bread slowly softens, becoming a doughy, foamy mush. You stir it with a paddle, releasing little pockets of air that smell like last week's lunch. Not unpleasant, just very assertive. To this mash, you add soaked dates for sweetness, a bit of wild yeast from a previous batch, and whatever herbs you've got lying around. Today it's coriander and a bit of fenugreek. Fancy. This method ferments faster, but the beer it produces is rougher around the edges, cloudier, chunkier, and with the kind of texture you politely describe as hearty. Still, this bread beer holds its place in Egyptian history. Some scholars think it was the original method, predating grain mashing entirely. Others argue it was a wartime shortcut. Historians still debate whether the bread-based beer was a sign of thrift, innovation, or just a really good excuse to reuse stale loaves. As the day warms, a visiting brewer from up the Nile arrives, bringing tales of his region's unique additions. Juniper berries, dried figs, even fermented camel's milk once. though that one apparently ended badly. You laugh together and exchange brewing notes, though he swears your village's beer has an elegance of bouquet, which you suspect is polite speak for less gritty. He also shares an odd tip, placing a carved wooden frog into the fermenting jar to encourage luck. You're not sure what the frogs think about this tradition, but it does explain the weird amphibian carvings you've seen around the storage rooms. You decide to carve one later and toss it into your next batch. Can't hurt. By late afternoon, the beer you helped start this morning is foaming nicely. The fermentation is lively, and the surface is covered with little islands of date skins and coriander bubbles. You skim off the top layer gently, murmuring a chant someone taught you. No one remembers what the words mean, but you say them anyway. Maybe it's for the beer. Maybe it's for you. You carry a sealed jar to a shady corner to cool, tucking it under damp linen soaked from the Nile. It will ferment slowly overnight, and by morning it might be ready for first tasting. Outside, a group of children are playing brewer and priest, which mostly involves one of them sniffing a bowl dramatically while the others scramble to fix imaginary brewing errors. You chuckle. Cultural trauma starts early. One of the elders joins you, eyes twinkling, and tells you that in her youth, beer was also used in rituals to honor the dead. Not just the gods. At funerals, the first jar would be poured as an offering, the second shared in silence, and the third was usually the beginning of the after party. The dead don't mind noise, she says, so long as the beer's good. You think about that for a long time. How something as humble as a jar of fizzing grain can be tied to joy, sorrow, daily chores, divine rites, and drunken lion goddesses. It's not just a drink. It's a thread through every part of life. And now you're part of it. As the sun sinks low, you help carry the day's jars to the cool pit where they'll rest overnight. Each one is heavy, warm, and humming softly with unseen activity. You whisper goodnight to them, just in case. The brewhouse quiets and you walk slowly home beneath the orange-pink sky, already dreaming of tomorrow's batch. You wake to the sound of a donkey braying and someone loudly scolding it in hieroglyphic-accurate curses. A typical morning. The Nile glimmers pale gold through the window slats, and outside, the village is already humming with the quiet chaos of daily life. Potters clinking their wares into baskets, reed weavers rhythmically slicing and tying, and somewhere, the unmistakable wet plop of a beer jar being uncorked just a little too enthusiastically. You wash your face with cool river water, slip on your brewing shift, still faintly stained from yesterday's date syrup press, and head back to the brewhouse. You've got one job on your mind this morning: quality control. That means tasting. Yes, professional, historically sacred, completely serious beer tasting. Try to contain your excitement. When you arrive, the first task is to sample the previous day's date beer now that it's had a full night to ferment in the cool pit. You reach for the first jar, lift the damp linen covering, and take a slow, anticipatory sniff. There's a sharp tang of wild yeast, the sweet undertone of dates, and wait, is that a trace of cinnamon? Who added cinnamon? You glance around. Someone shrugs. Fell in, they say. You choose to believe it was divine intervention. With a smooth motion, you dip a ladle into the top layer and bring it to your lips. The flavor hits all at once. Earthy, tart, slightly fizzy, and surprisingly complex for something made without metal tools or thermometers. It's good. Really good. You pass the jar to your brewing partner, who nods in approval before scribbling something into a wax tablet. It's probably just a doodle of a frog, but it feels official. After the tasting, you join a few others in preparing for something special, an upcoming festival. Nothing extravagant, just a small village celebration of the barley harvest, but for brewers, it's a major moment. Everyone wants the best batch to serve the gods and the guests. The problem, so does every other brewer. Things get quietly competitive. This year, the twist is that each team must incorporate a local herb into their beer. You're assigned to use Blue Lotus, a dreamy, fragrant flower believed to induce mild euphoria. Some say it helps you see the gods. Others say it just makes you giggle uncontrollably and fall asleep on your neighbor's goat. You begin by steeping the dried petals in a warm infusion. The smell is delicate, like honey and river wind. You blend this into a mash of lightly roasted barley, mashed dates, and a touch of coriander. The result is a vivid lavender-hued brew that bubbles with a lazy, hypnotic fizz. As it ferments, you decorate your storage jar with simple reed etchings, a frog, of course, and a figure dancing beneath stars. Someone compliments the artistry. You claim it's just for luck, but secretly you hope the gods are paying attention. That afternoon, an elder from a nearby village visits. She's renowned for her beer lore and has the kind of face that looks like it's tasted every flavor Egypt has ever brewed. She samples your lotus batch, raises one finely arched brow and mutters, "Acceptable. Maybe a bit more sun next time." Then she nods and shuffles off, her approval trailing like incense. Later, you gather with a small group for a lesson on ancient measurements. Yes, really. You sit cross-legged while an older brewer uses bits of string, pebbles, and broken pottery to demonstrate how quantities were judged. No precise scales here, just instinct, experience, and phrases like "as wide as a duck's walk" or "as much as a priest sweats." Shockingly, everyone understands exactly what those mean. You then review the festival rules. Each brewer must present their beer to the village judge, who is famously strict. He once disqualified a beer for being too spiritual. What does that mean? No one knows, but it's widely feared. So tonight, your group runs one final tasting session. You pour tiny servings into shallow clay bowls, and as you sip, the beer blooms on your tongue, cool, floral, slightly bitter at the finish, like the Nile's edge on a hot day. A debate begins about Blue Lotus's real effect. Some argue it's mildly psychedelic. Others think it's just poetic marketing. Historians, for what it's worth, still argue whether the plant was brewed to alter consciousness or simply for taste. Either way, you've never felt more relaxed sipping something in your entire life. It tastes like soft music. The evening ends with laughter, soft lantern light, and a group decision to name the batch Lotus Dream. You like the sound of it. A little pretentious, maybe, but dreamy. Before bed, you visit the brewhouse one more time. The jars sit lined up like sleepy children, each one marked with tiny symbols or etched lines. You brush your hand along their tops, checking for warmth. Not too hot. Good. You whisper a short blessing, a mix of words you've heard from others and ones you make up on the spot. Something about sweetness, patience, and frogs who don't fall in. Then slowly, you make your way back through the quiet streets. You pass the old granary, where shadowy figures haul sacks of barley under torchlight, prepping for the next day. A cat slinks across the path in front of you, tail high. You take that as a good omen. Back at your home, you slide onto your mat, the scent of blue lotus still clinging to your sleeves. You close your eyes, imagining the festival, the music, the joy, the silent clink of jars. And maybe, if all goes well, a little nod of approval from the judge who once rejected a batch for lacking confidence. You smile. Brewing, after all, is more than ingredients. It's timing, trust, and a little bit of dreaming. Morning comes with the thick, syrupy light that only the Egyptian sun can provide. You rise slowly, limbs still hazy from the late-night lotus tastings and dreams that felt just a little too vivid to be normal. Maybe the elders are right about that flower. Today is the festival. The barley harvest has been counted, the brewers have preened, and the village is buzzing like a clay jar left uncorked too long. You wipe down your brewing tools with a damp reed cloth, smoothing out yesterday's fingerprints, and tuck a few fresh lotus petals into your belt for flair. Because nothing says subtle confidence like aromatic accessorizing. You arrive at the village square just as the first performers begin setting up. A group of young dancers with reed flutes and makeshift drums. Children dart between stalls stacked with figs, painted pots and necklaces made of dried fish bones, an acquired taste. It's a full sensory scene. Music, chatter, roasting onions, and somewhere, the distinct pop of fermenting jars being gently tapped open. The beer contest begins near the central altar, which is draped in fresh-cut papyrus and shaded by a makeshift linen canopy. Each brewing team presents their best batch to a stone-faced judge known only as Uncle Neshi. His nose can apparently detect unripe dates from across a courtyard, and rumor has it he once made a novice brewer cry just by raising an eyebrow. You approach with your jar cradled carefully in both arms. It's warm against your skin, like a sun-baked tortoise shell, and the etching of the frog you carved earlier has been polished smooth from nervous rubbing. Neshi takes the bowl from your hands with a slow nod. He sniffs, he sips. He holds the liquid on his tongue like it's the key to unlocking the universe. Then he squints and tilts his head just slightly to the right. That's it. No words. No gestures, just the tiniest tilt. Gasps ripple through the crowd. That's basically applause. You step back, flushed and proud, and watch the rest of the entries roll in. One batch is red-tinged with hibiscus, another pale and cloudy with marsh herbs, and a third, curiously infused with smoked fish. Bold choice. Uncle Neshi, to his credit, doesn't flinch, though his brow does twitch just once. As the judging wraps up, a scribe begins noting down the top contenders. Your name, well, technically your team name, Jarheads, makes the shortlist. Cheers erupt. You're pulled into a chaotic dance by an elderly woman with knees of iron and rhythm like a papyrus metronome. You twirl, you stumble, you laugh. No one spills their beer. A miracle. Once the sun is high, the village priest steps forward to bless the harvest and, importantly, the brewers. He chants an invocation to Happy, god of the Nile, and then to Tenenet, goddess of beer and childbirth. You suspect she's a little too busy to attend both duties at once, but it's worth a shot. The priest pours a small jar of beer into the earth, a tribute to the gods and the soil. You join the crowd in a slow, murmured hymn. It's one of those rare moments when the entire village breathes in sync, carried by faith, habit, and maybe just a touch of buzzed serenity. After the formalities, the real festival kicks off. Drummers pick up tempo. Merchants call out increasingly generous discounts. Someone begins juggling loaves of Bapir bread, and someone else tries to juggle cats. That one ends poorly. You wander toward a shaded stall, where a retired brewer is offering samples of experimental beers. One is brewed with honey and fig sap. It's thick, almost chewable, and oddly pleasant. Another uses toasted chickpeas in place of barley. It tastes like something between breakfast and a dare. You nod appreciatively. Innovation takes courage. Nearby, a traveling scholar has unrolled a scroll documenting every known method of Egyptian fermentation. It's about as long as your arm span, densely packed with ink and smudges. He claims to have uncovered evidence that some brewers experimented with fermentation using palm fruit pits, though historians still argue whether this was deliberate or just a storage accident that got out of hand. Either way, the result was apparently explosive. You're fascinated, not just by the process but by the sheer scope of it all. Brewing isn't a job, it's a legacy. Every clay jar, every frothy surface, every carved frog or fig leaf offering, each one a small prayer, a moment of hope preserved in yeast. As dusk approaches, fires are lit, casting flickering light on jars and smiling faces. Children fall asleep under benches, clutching woven beer mugs carved from gourd shells. Someone begins playing a soft tune on an old lyre, and you find yourself swaying in place, lotus-scented air wrapping gently around your thoughts. You sip your last bowl of beer slowly. It's slightly warmer now, the fizz mellowed, the flavors richer somehow. It tastes like everything you've done right in the past few days, subtle, patient, and full of stories. Your thoughts drift to the myths, Hather's wild nights, gods placated with frothy offerings, sacred rituals that began with a jar just like yours. Maybe they're more than stories. Maybe in your own way, you've joined that long, strange line of brewers, dreamers, and devotees. One of your brewing partners nudges you, holding up a clay plaque that reads, "Second place, Festival Brew." You both burst out laughing. Not bad, considering the fish beer somehow got first. You carry the plaque home like a trophy and set it on your shelf beside a half-burned reed wick and a dried lotus flower. A little shrine to small wins. And as the moon rises over the river, casting pale reflections across your walls, you lie down, the taste of date beer still on your lips, and think, this was a good day to be a brewer. The day after the festival, everything smells faintly of ash, honey, and trampled papyrus. You rise later than usual, sore from dancing with 3 different elders who all claim to have invented the two-step, but may have just been stomping enthusiastically in sandals. Outside, the village has that slightly hungover quiet. Pottery shards litter the path, a few leftover garlands droop from doorways, and someone is snoring audibly from inside a grain basket. It's a good day for cleaning up, and for bragging subtly, of course, about that shiny second-place plaque now gleaming on your shelf. You head to the brew house with a slower step, not out of laziness, but because you know today isn't for brewing. It's for reviewing, tallying what worked, what didn't, and what made Uncle Neshi tilt his head just enough to impress half the village. There's no better feeling, really. Your brewing crew gathers around a large, flat slab, your unofficial strategy table. You go over notes, laugh about the judge's eyebrow, and taste test one last sip from the Lotus batch. Even slightly oxidized, it still carries that dreamlike, mellow quality. One of your partners swears it helped him remember all the names of his cousins in order for the first time ever. Historic. Then the talk turns to technique. One brewer insists the secret was soaking the dates overnight instead of sun-drying them. Another claims the real magic came from fermenting in the shadow of the storage pit wall. Cooler temperatures, they say knowingly, though there's no thermometer in sight. Still, they're probably right. Ancient Egyptian fermentation relied heavily on intuition, observation, and just a dash of hopeful mysticism. You take time to clean the tools, scrubbing wooden paddles with sand and river water, then hanging them from pegs to dry. The mash tubs are emptied, scraped clean with bits of reed, and left in the sun to bleach. The brewhouse smells earthy again, barley, clay, faint yeast, and a little bittersweet, like the end of a song you were just starting to love. Later in the day, a visiting brewer from the Delta arrives. She's young, sharp-eyed, and known for experimenting with unripe figs. She's heard of your Lotus batch and offers a trade, a jar of her fig wheat ale for a taste of yours. You agree. Barter is the original brewer's currency, after all. Her beer is tart smooth, with a whisper of tannin that makes your tongue curl thoughtfully. You nod, make a mental note, and invite her to visit your pit next season. She tells you about a brewing technique used in her region, pressing the mash through layered palm fronds instead of linen to extract a clearer wort. It's messier, she warns, but the result is a cleaner taste with fewer floaties. Her word. You laugh and imagine Uncle Neshi swirling a bowl of palm frond-filtered ale like he's a Nile sommelier. The conversation drifts to the topic of yeast. No one in the room can quite explain it. It's invisible, temperamental, and sometimes acts like it has opinions. Historians today still debate exactly how ancient Egyptians managed fermentation so consistently, without even knowing what yeast was. Was it residue on the clay jars, wild yeast from the air, or a kind of half-understood ritual passed down like a secret handshake? You decide it was probably all three, and also that yeast might be a little sentient. As the sun begins to dip, a group of elders gather for a storytelling hour. This is your favorite part of post-festival days. You sit among them, the second-place plaque tucked discreetly under your arm like a very humble trophy. One elder speaks of a legendary beer made with carob and moonlight, an obvious exaggeration, but he sells it with such passion that even the skeptics lean in. Another tells of a time beer was used to appease a crocodile spirit haunting the canal. Did it work? Someone asks. No, she replies, but the crocodile seemed happier. You laugh, but privately hope never to meet a beer-judging crocodile. Someone else, a retired priest with breath like boiled onions, shares a theory that each brewer's batch carried their emotional energy. Joy brews sweet, he says. Worry brews sour. Grief, well, grief curdles the foam. It's poetic. Slightly smelly, but poetic. You scribble it into your wax tablet just in case. Evening falls, and the Nile sings softly in the distance, reeds swaying like slow metronomes. You walk the brewhouse perimeter one last time, checking for tools left behind, jars cooling too fast, or wandering goats with a taste for barley. Everything's in order. You settle beside a friend on a woven mat and sip a small, warm cup of leftover brew, more herbal than fizzy now, a little like drinking history. The stars begin to flicker on, and someone starts humming a lullaby. It's barely audible over the crackle of the cooking fires, but it wraps around you like a reed blanket. Before heading in for the night, you write a short note on your brewing wall, just a few pictographs. A sun, a jar, a frog, and a lotus. It means nothing official, but to you it means this batch mattered. You lie down, fingers sticky with old barley, and stare at the ceiling. You think of that fig beer, of yeast, of crocodiles and moonlight and the strange, warm magic that happens when people put their hearts into clay jars and wait patiently for bubbles. Brewing is transformation. Grain becomes drink. Time becomes flavor. You become part of something older than pyramids, older even than words for what it means to gather, sip, and feel human. And with that, you drift off, content and a little bit fizzy yourself. The next morning arrives wrapped in the muffled hush that only follows 3 days of celebration. The village has returned to its gentle rhythm, goats bleating somewhere in the distance, the occasional clatter of a dropped amphora, and the rhythmic shhhshhh of brooms sweeping sand from thresholds. You stretch under your woven blanket, arms stiff from yesterday's cleanup but spirit light. The brewing season may be winding down, but that doesn't mean there's nothing left to do. Far from it. This is the part no one really talks about, the long tail of a batch. The jars that didn't ferment right. The ones that did, but just weirdly. Time to open them, taste them, and catalog the lessons and potential accidental genius. You begin with the outcasts. One jar that was sealed before the mash cooled completely, its lid now puffed up ominously like a frog who knows he's being watched. You open it carefully. The smell is complex. Sweet, sour, and oddly floral. You sip, it's not terrible. In fact, it might make a good vinegar. You mark the jar with a smear of black ink, for pickling only or enemies. Another one is practically clear, almost no color at all. You suspect this was the jar your apprentice forgot to add yeast to. Or maybe the gods just decided it wasn't time. It tastes like sadness and dishwater. You pour it out with a muttered apology to Happy. Then there's one small, overlooked jar shoved behind the Bapper sacks. You open it. The smell hits you like a sleepy fist, dates, lotus, and mint. You don't remember adding mint, but someone clearly did because the flavor is crisp, cool, and unexpectedly refreshing. You blink. This might be your new summer batch. Your apprentice scurries in, clutching a palm leaf scroll and looking unusually excited. "We got a letter," they announce. "It's from a temple in Memphis. Apparently your name, or your beers, really made its way up the Nile. They're requesting a ceremonial batch to be delivered by month's end for a festival honoring Tenenet. Your first commission. You nod solemnly even though you want to leap into the air like a startled ibis. This is real, temple beer, sacred brewing. This means adjusting everything, timing, ingredients, even vessel design. Temple jars are taller, narrower, and typically adorned with symbolic carvings of deities and grain spirits. You make a quick mental note to commission a potter with steady hands and no sense of humor. That night by firelight, you sit with your brewing crew and begin planning. You lay out 3 test batches, one with extra dates, one with coriander seeds, and one with wild honey. You light a single lamp and sip each slowly, eyes closed, listening to the way each one moves through your mouth like a whispered story. The coriander one is bold, almost medicinal. The honey batch is mellow but might ferment too fast in the temple heat. The extra date version is sweet, thick, and finishes with a faint sparkle on the tongue. You hum thoughtfully. That's the one. It tastes like reverence. Your apprentice suggests adding a pinch of black cumin, said to ward off spoilage and bad dreams. Historians still argue whether this was folk wisdom or just a culinary trend, but you like the idea. Besides, anything that improves sleep can't hurt. Over the next few days, your brewhouse transforms into something more like a shrine. You scrub the floor with lemon-scented reeds, repaint the brewing symbols on the wall, ankh, frog, barley stalk, and offer a tiny jar of your favorite batch at dawn each morning, just in case Tenenet is watching. The temple sends a courier with strict instructions. The beer must be delivered in a sealed jar, unfiltered, blessed by a priest, and decorated with at least one lapis lazuli bead. You don't ask why. The gods have their ways. You acquire the bead, of course, from a traveling merchant who insists it came from a royal bracelet. You pretend to believe him. As the final brewing day arrives, the pressure is thick in the air. You measure ingredients 3 times, stir with reverent patience, and sing softly to the mash as it thickens. An old song, passed down from your grandmother, about frogs in moonlight and grain that sings when it's ready. The fermentation is swift. 2 days in, the scent is rich and balanced, the foam rising like slow ocean swells. You whisper your thanks into the jar before sealing it with beeswax and linen, then carry it to the blessing altar at the edge of town. The priest meets you in silence. He inspects the jar, nods, and taps it with a carved stick. It rings deep and steady. A good omen. He utters the prayer, touches the lapis bead, and marks the seal with a symbol you can't read but instinctively trust. The courier arrives the next morning, his bark low in the water and his demeanor disinterested. You hand over the jar, watching it disappear into a woven crate with other offerings: dates, linen bolts, dried fish, and a single very anxious-looking goose. That evening, your crew throws a quiet celebration. No dancing this time. Just bowls of plain barley beer, a roasted onion stew, and soft music from a 2-stringed lyre. You sit back, legs stretched out, and listen to your apprentice argue that the coriander batch deserved more appreciation. You nod and promise to try it again. After all, experimentation is the brewer's eternal loop. As the stars prick the velvet sky, you lean back against the brewhouse wall. Your hands are still stained with barley and ink, and your soul feels oddly light. Somewhere up the Nile, your beer is making its sacred journey. And here in this quiet village, you've become a brewer whose story will ripple, however gently, into the future. The days drift on, soft as river mist, and soon the temple festival is just a warm story passed between villagers. No word has come from Memphis, but that's expected. Sacred beer travels in sacred silence. Praise, if it comes at all, tends to arrive years later, sandwiched between a shipment of scrolls and someone muttering, "Oh yes, your batch was adequate." But in the meantime, something curious begins to happen. People start coming to you. Not just your crew, not just the occasional over-enthusiastic apprentice, but travelers. Visiting brewers from downstream, curious scribes, even a timid noblewoman who claims she once saw your name etched into a granary wall in Abydos. Or maybe it was your frog symbol, she adds, blinking like someone unsure if frogs are offensive. They ask questions. They want to know how you got your foam so even, your mouth feels so soft, your flavor so calm. You try to explain. The layering of dates and bapier, the shadow timing, the careful sun exposure. But you can see it in their eyes. They want more than technique. They want your why. So you start telling stories. About your first batch that exploded. About the time a donkey drank half your fermenting mash and sang off-key for an hour. About the lotus experiment. And they lean in, not just for knowledge, but because they see something strange and beautiful in your process. A craft made sacred not by the gods alone, but by repetition, reverence, and just a pinch of cheek. You begin to realize you've become a kind of sleepy legend. It's not about fame. Fame is for generals and architects. But reputation, that whisper of respect carried by barley-scented breezes, that's something a brewer can sip slowly. One afternoon, an old man arrives. He's wrapped in faded linen, smells faintly of fish paste, and walks with the kind of limp you earn by stepping on your own amphora too many times. "I used to brew," he says, with the solemn air of someone confessing to a noble crime. "Long ago, before I forgot what the foam was supposed to look like." You invite him in. You make a batch together, just a small one, nothing fancy. Barley, a hint of sycamore fig, and your favorite well water. He stirs slowly, muttering to himself. "Foam like whipped clouds," he says. "Mash thick as river mud but smoother." He nods at your reeds. "You use these, good." Reeds are honest. You sip the finished batch under the moon. It's not your best beer, but it's kind. It tastes like memory and calloused hands. And when he leaves the next morning, he squeezes your shoulder and whispers, "You remember what I forgot." The brewhouse itself seems to respond. The walls stay cooler longer. The jars breathe more gently. A small frog has taken up residence near the storage pit and shows no sign of leaving. You take that as a blessing. One evening, while reorganizing your fermenting records, really just a stack of palm leaf notes stained with ale, you find your very first batch summary. The ink has run, the drawings are crude, and one note just says, "Too chewy." Ask someone. You laugh out loud, loud enough to startle the frog. You sit back and think about how far you've come. Not in space, you're still in the same village after all, but in time. In attention. In the depth of what it means to shape a drink that shaped a civilization. Because by now, you know, ancient Egyptian beer wasn't just refreshment. It was ritual, rations, medicine, diplomacy. Workers were paid in beer. Gods were honored with it. Children sipped diluted versions. Grandmothers mixed it into porridge. Entire treaties may have been toasted with jugs sealed in beeswax and reverence. Historians still debate how standardized the recipes really were. Some argue that every region had its own style. Others say the brewers followed strict temple blueprints. You suspect it was a little of both, and maybe some batches were just happy accidents that got lucky under the right full moon. Your apprentice, now bolder, suggests organizing a small festival of your own. Not a full-on temple event, just a village gathering with music, storytelling, and experimental brews. You agree with one condition: no frog impersonations this year. The last one got out of hand. The night before the event, you brew a secret batch. Just you, the moon, and a handful of hibiscus petals. You don't write anything down. You trust your hands, your instincts. The quiet voice in your gut that says, "Now pour, now stir, now breathe." When the villagers arrive, you unveil your newest experiment with theatrical flair, holding the amphora like it's a royal baby. The taste is floral, effervescent, slightly tart. One elder calls it a perfume that learned to dance. You accept the compliment with the gravitas of a pharaoh's butler. Later, after the laughter fades and the lyres grow soft, you sit with your apprentice by the glowing embers of the fire pit. You talk about the future, not just of brewing, but of stories, of how recipes carry not just ingredients, but echoes, of how one day someone might find your frog symbol etched in a forgotten cellar wall and smile. And you hope they'll sip something strange and familiar, something fermented and soft, and think, someone loved this craft, someone brewed this on purpose. And in that way, you'll still be there, whispering through foam and time. The seasons begin to turn again, the sun mellowing into a gentler warmth as floodwaters retreat and green shoots peek through the silt-rich soil. It's planting season once more, a quiet time, a planning time. The date palms start to fruit again, fat clusters forming like sleepy chandeliers overhead, and you know without even tasting, the next brewing season is coming. But this year, you're not starting from scratch. You're not simply gathering ingredients, you're curating them. Selecting the best palms, the sweetest Bapier loaves, even specific reeds for straining based on how they bend in your hand. There's a kind of confidence now, soft and low like the hum of bees near a sunlit jar. Your apprentice, who now insists on being called a journeyman brewer, you allow it, mostly to stop the endless monologues, suggests designing a new storage rack for your amphory. It's not a bad idea. Your current system involves stacking them in a precarious pyramid that has toppled more than once during windstorms or clumsy dancing. You sketch out some options using charcoal on the back of an old scroll. A-frame, maybe, hanging baskets, intriguing. A sunken pit lined with linen and crushed seashells. You pause. That last one is ridiculous, but also maybe not. You've learned not to dismiss the odd idea. Remember, after all, the hibiscus batch. Or the one time your frog accidentally knocked a jar into the fire pit and you discovered slightly smoked beer. That one's still popular with the younger crowd who call it grit brew. So you build a prototype of the sunken pit. It's surprisingly elegant, keeps the beer cool, protects against rodents. Your neighbor comes by to ask if you're burying treasure. You respond, yes, fermented treasure. Word continues to spread, slowly and unevenly like ink on old linen. A traveling artist from the Delta arrives with a scroll of curious drawings. Various frogs, amphory, and what appears to be a depiction of you, wild-haired, holding two jars aloft like the god happy in mid-toast. The resemblance is questionable, but the sentiment is flattering. You offer the artist a taste of your newest batch. He declares it poetry in a cup and immediately falls asleep in your doorway. You decide not to take that personally. The days pass, marked by small rituals. Inspecting grain, grinding Bapier, checking jars for signs of excess foam or underwhelming spirit. Brewing becomes something you can now do half awake, though you try not to, just in case the gods are watching. Or the frog's still there, by the way. You've named him Foamy. One morning, you wake to find a new letter. Not from a temple, but from another brewer far down the river, who's heard of your coriander experiments and wants to trade notes. You smile. You've become part of something larger than yourself now, a quiet network of people bound by grain, yeast, and the shared joy of mild intoxication. Historians still argue whether these brewer-to-brewer letters were common practice or rare outliers. You suspect they happened more often than we think. After all, what better way to spend a flood season than writing down your failures and mailing them to someone else to laugh at? You send a reply, complete with doodles of your funniest fermentation disasters. The batch that foamed itself out the door, the time a bee got trapped in a sealed jar and turned the whole thing oddly floral, and of course, the mint debacle, still unexplained, still surprisingly good. A week later, a gift arrives in return, a packet of powdered blue lotus petals meant to be added during the cooling stage. The note suggests it will induce flavors of calm with mild visions if taken under moonlight. You raise an eyebrow, then set a reminder to test it under controlled conditions, i.e., not during a village council meeting. That evening, you brew a single jar using the powder. The scent is hypnotic, floral, earthy, with something faintly electric underneath. You seal it carefully, set it aside, and label it for dreaming or storytelling, or both. Your apprentice watches you with wide eyes. What if it turns people into crocodiles? They whisper. Then we've invented something even better, you reply. Later, under the stars, you finally taste the lotus batch, just a sip. It's smooth, silky, almost sweet at first, then settles into your tongue like a lullaby. You close your eyes. No crocodiles. Just a slow warmth, a flicker of memory that might not be yours, and a sense that time is stretching slightly, as though inviting you to take your shoes off and stay a while. You know now with a certainty as quiet as falling sand that this craft, this ancient, bubbling, half-forgotten magic is your calling. It's more than mixing grain and water. It's storytelling in liquid form. It's history you can sip. You look around your brewhouse, its walls soft with soot and spice, and you smile. Not everything here is perfect. Your amphora labels are still mostly illegible. Your frog keeps stealing bits of dried bapier. And you're pretty sure your apprentice is secretly fermenting figs in the back room without permission. But it's yours, all of it. And as the moon rises and the jars breathe in unison, you think, maybe beer is a kind of prayer, a soft one, bubbling, slightly sticky, but earnest. It's been years now, though time in the village rarely announces itself with fanfare. Seasons blend like well-aged mash, one batch folding gently into the next. You've gone from being the eccentric brewer with sticky hands to, well, still the eccentric brewer, but one whose sticky hands are now legendary. And today, something extraordinary arrives. A delegation from Memphis, not priests, not merchants, but scholars. They descend upon your humble brewhouse like dust-coated storks, stoic, wide-eyed, muttering in academic tones about grain types, fermentation charts, and documented beverage typologies. One of them insists on measuring your frog. You politely decline on Foamy's behalf. At first, you're flattered, then vaguely alarmed. They ask a lot of questions. How long do you boil? When do you stir? Why do you chant under your breath when sealing jars? You shrug. It helps the foam rise correctly, you offer, which is technically true and completely unverifiable. They take notes furiously. You catch a glimpse of a scroll, pre-modern ale chants, efficacy unclear, charming. But amid their poking and prodding, you begin to notice something else, genuine wonder. The kind of quiet awe that bubbles up not from titles or temples, but from touching something older than themselves. One of them, an older man with ink-stained fingers, leans in while you're layering bapier in a new amphora and whispers, "My grandmother brewed like this. I thought it was just village nonsense." You nod. Most wisdom starts as nonsense. The scholars stay for 3 days. During that time, you show them how to listen to the jars, not just watch them. How to smell for the moment before fermentation begins. How to recognize a good date not by color, but by the way it sticks slightly to your thumb, like a clingy child in a market. They are terrible at grinding grain. You let them try anyway. At night, you gather around a fire and share experimental brews. One scholar produces a record of a Nubian yeast strain thought to be extinct. You trade them 2 lotus jars for a sample. It smells adventurous, like sour bread in summer. Historians still argue whether these knowledge exchanges ever happened, or if they're the wishful thinking of modern scholars imagining collegial harmony in a world often divided by temple walls and dynastic politics. But you've learned that some truths aren't written in ink. They're shared in foam, laughter, and the occasional mild hangover. When the delegation leaves, they present you with a gift, a carved stone seal bearing your frog symbol. In case, they say, someone wants to copy your work, now they'll know the real thing. You thank them, bow low, and tuck the seal into a jar of barley for safekeeping. Foamy immediately tries to sit on it. Life returns to normal, slow, sun-warmed, slightly malty. You continue brewing, but now your apprentice handles most of the basic work. You spend more time experimenting, trying combinations no one's considered. Roasted fig and ginger, pomegranate peel, a faint sprinkle of natron. Some are awful. One accidentally bleaches the inside of your mouth. But every now and then something clicks. You document less now. You've realized that memory is not just something you write down. It's something you live, brew, and share. One quiet afternoon, a child from the village skips into your courtyard. Barefoot, eyes bright, clutching a tiny clay jar. "My mother says you helped her once," she says. "She had bad dreams. You gave her sleepy beer." You smile, kneel down, and take the jar. "And what would you like?" She frowns, thinks hard. "Something that makes the stars sing." You consider this. Reach for a pinch of crushed blue lotus, a drizzle of date syrup, and a sprig of something green from the back garden whose name you've long forgotten. Come back tomorrow, you say. Bring a blanket. She nods solemnly and skips off. That night you test the mixture under moonlight. It's mellow, gentle, and somehow in the hush that follows your first sip, you do hear something faintly musical in the distance. It might be crickets, or your neighbor's terrible flute playing, or something older, softer. You realize then, this is what you've been brewing all along, not just beer but memory. A little time in a bottle, something sweet and slow that lets people pause, breathe, and drift for a moment outside the clockwork world. And soon, someone else will take your place. Maybe your apprentice. Maybe the girl who wanted star music. Doesn't matter. Because the method lives on, not in scrolls or temples, but in hands, noses, and ears tuned to bubbling jars and sun-warmed grain. You take your last sip of the night, look up at the stars, and wonder which one might be a spilled amphora twinkling from another brewer's dream. The sky fades into a sleepy lavender, and the air smells like ripened grain and river mist. You find yourself moving slower now, not from age exactly, but from a kind of earned stillness, like a jar that's settled into its final form. Your apprentice, no, your successor, now handles the brewing with a confidence that makes you both proud and mildly suspicious. They've taken your original frog symbol and stylized it into something almost fashionable. There's even talk of a second brewhouse upriver. You raise an eyebrow and say nothing, but you allow yourself a smile when you catch them gently tapping the amphora lids 3 times before sealing, just like you always did. Rituals like yeast find a way to cling. You still visit the brewhouse most mornings. Not to meddle, well, not much. Mostly to smell, to listen. There's an art to hearing the rhythm of fermentation, and you'd miss it if it vanished. The soft fizz, the whisper of bubbles escaping through the capstones, the occasional thump of a jar settling deeper into its bed of sand. It's your lullaby now. You spend more time at the river, watching her roll slowly past the reeds like she's thinking about something important and forgetting it halfway through. The Nile doesn't rush. Neither do you. And sometimes visitors still arrive, pilgrims, curiosity seekers, or those who simply want something gentle to drink while they tell you about the strange dreams they've had. You always have something ready. A pale batch for the anxious, a tart one for the melancholic, a cinnamon-sweet stout for those who don't know what they're looking for. You don't charge. You only ask for stories in return. One man, a traveling scribe with ink-smudged fingers and a tendency to talk in his sleep, tells you he once read a fragment about a brewer so revered they were buried with a golden amphora sealed forever. They said the gods wanted a sip. He shrugs. You nod. I hope they chilled it first. Foamy the frog, unbelievably still alive, now rules a small kingdom of tadpoles in your garden basin. Children come to feed them. One swears Foamy winked. You wouldn't put it past him. And then one morning, something unexpected. Your old clay seal, the one gifted by the scholars years ago, appears on a new jar you've never seen. Pale, tightly sealed, marked with that familiar frog. But this one isn't yours. You lift the lid, smell, sip. A new taste. Light herbal with a whisper of mint and something you can't quite name, and that's when you understand. Someone's passed the story on. Maybe your apprentice's apprentice. Maybe someone you forgot teaching, who remembered your chant, your gestures, your deep belief that beer is more than drink. It's a way of saying, we were here. We made something gentle. Historians still argue what ancient beer truly tasted like. They debate the ratios, the strains of yeast, the properties of Nile water versus Delta runoff. Some dismiss the entire practice as little more than soggy bread soup. Let them argue. You know better, because you've tasted beer that held memory. You've brewed with laughter. You've seen a child stop crying at the scent of Bapir baking. You've watched a lonely widow find comfort in a single clay cup. This craft is not about precision. It's about presence. And as the stars begin their climb and the sky slips into velvet, you let yourself imagine a future, far away, in a different tongue, maybe even through glowing screens, where someone else tells your story. Maybe they'll get the details wrong. Maybe they'll laugh at the frog. Maybe they'll say how quaint, how boring, and fall asleep before the third amphora is even sealed. Perfect. That means it's working. You lean back, hands sticky with grain, eyes heavy with the comfort of repetition, and you think, this is what history should feel like. Slow, warm, slightly fermented. A toast to forgotten brewers, to patient jars, and to the soft fizz of time. The story rests now, like a full jar on a cool stone shelf. You can still smell the faint notes of dates and yeast lingering in the air, and your hands, though stilled, remember the rhythm of grinding, stirring, sealing. That kind of knowledge never leaves the body. It becomes breath. It becomes memory. It becomes part of how you fall asleep. Outside, the night has deepened. The sky no longer just dark, but richly woven, full of the same stars the ancients watched as they sipped their quiet prayers under palm leaves and reed roofs. You can almost hear the rustle of papyrus in the breeze, the low hum of insects pulsing softly along the banks of the Nile. And just beyond that, maybe there's still a faint bubbling. Not loud, not rushed, just the slow, contented sound of fermentation at work. Life doing what it's always done. Rising, settling, repeating. Let your thoughts drift like the river, no need to steer. The jars are sealed, the work is done. And the gods, if they're listening, are surely smiling. Or sipping. You don't need to remember every detail. Just know that someone long ago made something gentle for themselves, for others. For the quiet moments at the end of the day when all you want is something warm to hold and a story to follow towards sleep. So now, let your breath soften. Let your body sink deeper into the pillow, like sediment settling after a flood. You've brewed well, you've listened. And now you rest. May your dreams be slow, may your jars be full, and may tomorrow come with just the right amount of foam.